Wasn't sure how to intro our guest, an incredible lady who has a story that is so much fun and at the same time so touching and dynamic. But I have to give you this warning, it may be the most emotional podcast you've ever heard. I urge you to join, listen in, and understand that life is beautiful. We have to treasure every moment.
I couldn't get my passport. I couldn't get to it for like probably 24 hours. And so the doctors in that hospital said, "You will die. We have to do this today." One day there was no movement, and I called my friend who was an OBGYN. She told me what I should do, and there was still no movement. And so she said, "Amy, go to the hospital." And it was right around Christmas. And as we were driving in to the hospital, I saw in a vision, there was a banner across the road and it said, "Sleep in heavenly peace." And I knew. And it was another ultrasound room, and they shut the ultrasound machine off and shook their head and "We're so sorry." I'm like, "What? What do you mean you're so sorry? What? Turn that back on. Look again." And they did. And I was like, there. I hear the heartbeat. I'm like, "That's your heartbeat, Amy." And it was true. Our baby, who was full term, had died right before birth. I always want to err on the side of giving. So let's bring her home. And I was like, "What? Really?" I mean, it was just the most exciting thing. And then I continued to do the advocacy work for, finding these children. And I found this little girl. There was a little video of her, and she reminded me of Toby, and she sparkled. And I was like, this little girl is going to be amazing. I can't even tell the story without getting goosebumps all over again.
But go ahead and tell the listeners the names of your children.
Joshua, Jency, Timothy, Annalie, Hope, Oliver, Oscar, Esty, Zeb, Dara, Kate, Toby, Windsor, and Summerlin. It was during COVID, and Brian had previously had a bunch of pneumothorax. So he had the tops of his lungs removed, like the top third of both lungs removed. And I was very afraid of him getting COVID and like dying of COVID when we were busy fighting brain cancer. He said with great emotion, "I'll do anything you guys want. I'll do anything you need, whatever you guys need to make this easier." And that's when Jency, my oldest, said, "Dad," she had already been thinking about it, but she didn't know how to bring it up. She said, "Dad, will you walk us girls down the aisle? You're not going to be here for any of our weddings." And he was like, "Yes, I'll do that."
Hi, and welcome to Born SuperHuman. So today, I wasn't sure how to intro our guest, an incredible lady who has a story that is so much fun and at the same time so touching and dynamic. But I have to give you this warning, it may be the most emotional podcast you've ever heard. I urge you to join, listen in, and understand that life is beautiful. We have to treasure every moment. So with that being said, Miss Amy Shaw, thank you so much for joining us at Born Superhuman.
I'm so happy to be here.
Incredible story that you've got. I know you just launched your book, and I don't even want to say the name of it yet because I want people to be able to understand where it came from, where the book came from. But when I first met you, we were at a speakers convention training, and you had this energy about you, this beauty about you, but I had no idea who you were, what you had done, what you had achieved. But I think after speaking to you, I had to drag my jaw out of the room. Just, Diane, I'm so excited to share your story, and it's beautiful. But before we get there, tell me about you as a little girl. Tell me about what your dreams were. What did you see for your life? Because we grow up with so much imagination.
Wow. As a little girl, I was creative as a little girl, always imagining. I played in the woods a lot with neighbors and actually caught frogs and snakes. And later I became afraid of snakes. But yeah, just dancing and creative stuff. I had a really good friend, and our families would get together maybe once a month. And she and I were both very creative, and we almost had like we had this creative synergy, and we would create these like houses out of, we would flip tables over and put blankets and crawl around, and we would make up this whole story of, how we were living underground. And I don't know, just every time it was something different. And I remember coming up with a pretend dentist office, and we would go in to the shower and mix up potions that we would bring things from the kitchen. And so, yeah, I was always really creative from the get-go. I do remember wanting to own a hot air balloon company. I never did, but
Not yet.
um, well, and that's okay if I don't. I got to go in my first hot air balloon, actually my only hot air balloon ride when I was 14. That was my birthday present when I turned 14. I thought it was gonna be more thrilling. I'm all about the thrill, and it was just kind of quiet and floaty. And I really want to jump out of an airplane. I think that would be a little more thrilling. That has yet to happen. So, um,
What was your dream? Like, were you just an open spirit where you didn't think ahead, you lived day by day, or was there a profession or a goal that you thought, when I'm older, I will be?
hmm. I was really suppressed as a child. I think I can even feel it just in my heart and my body as we're thinking about it. I was made fun of as a child at school for having big eyes, and I believed everything they said about me, and it was really hard. I didn't know that I was okay. I really thought that I was subhuman. It's interesting, your title, Born Superhuman. I truly grew up believing that I was subhuman. I was loved in my family, but I wasn't really taught that other people didn't have the right to tell me who I was and that I was less. And they told me that, and I believed them. So I don't know that I felt like I had the freedom to dream. Um, I just wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be like up to the level of normal. I felt like I was so much worse than everyone else. And that really marked how I felt about myself. And I remember, when I went away to college, kind of discovering that, oh, I'm kind of an extrovert. I kind of enjoy this. So, and I guess I learned that in high school too. But I don't other than the hot air balloon and just creating and that kind of stuff, I don't feel like I had any specific dream. I mean, I remember in high school, like, oh, I'm going to become a television broadcaster. I want to be on the morning news, and I want to have this kind of a dog, and I want to drive this kind of a car, and I want to live in Colorado, which I've never lived in Colorado. So it's really funny. All that has changed. So in high school, I did do a little internship with like the local NBC affiliate, and that was really fun. Yeah, I did some drama. I did the school announcements as a senior. So I definitely did some of that, but I don't know that I would say that I had a dream for per se.
It's beautiful because I've got obviously insights into your story that the listeners won't have yet.
Mm,
And to see where you've gone is unbelievable.
mm.
And what you do today. Tell me about your family growing up, brothers, sisters. How was your mum and dad? How was all that?
Yeah, my mom and dad really wanted to have children, and they really struggled. And after 5 years, I came along. So I was this, treasured golden child. And then my mom had a miscarriage after me. And I think she believed that there would never be any more children. And so they had an opportunity to adopt a baby, and they adopted my sister. So there's about 3.5 years between us. And then another 4 years passed, and my mom, surprise, got pregnant with my brother.
You had your sister, you had your brother, your mom, there was your dad and everything. Where did you find like your most peace?
I really enjoyed playing in the woods. That was just such a wonderful place. I actually went there in my head just a couple days ago, like remembering specific trees. And I remember the path that we had created because we would play so many times on that same thing. And we named different trees, and we would catch catch snakes and catch toads and frogs. And we had a snake happy birthday room so that anytime we caught a snake, we determined that that was its birthday and we would take it there and sing to it. And all the silly things you do as a child. I remember begging my mom and dad to come down and see what we were doing, and they never would. Now that I'm a mom, I'm like, yeah, I can understand why she didn't leave what she was doing and walk all the way down there. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is nice, Amy. So,
Beautiful.
mm,
And I've watched a few videos on YouTube that you had sent me to look at,
mm,
and it does look like the world that we wish we could grow up in. In other
mm,
words, there's a lot of play, a lot of fun, even through
mm.
the natural pain that I think so many people relate to when we're finding
Yeah,
ourselves through adolescence.
yeah.
And yet there
Mm,
seems like a lot of laughter, a lot of fun going through.
mm,
Tell me how your world changed as far as Brian came
mm.
along. Tell me how that story, the romance, how did you meet in the first place?
Well, we actually ended up growing up in the same town and we didn't know it. So our parents had previously known one another at a church. And then he was actually born in California. So we grew up in Ohio. And so they started there, and then Brian's parents went out to California, and Brian was born there. Then they came back and ended up settling in the same town. So we were using the same library, the same grocery store, and ended up in the same junior high. And then in high school, our parents, we were at some, and I don't even remember what it was, an honors banquet of some sort, and they recognized each other. And so they came and they introduced us. And I was busy talking and having fun with my friends, and Brian was very quiet and he didn't have much to say. So I probably met him and was like, "Hi, bye." And then I remember in the future, or after that point, like walking around the school, it was a pretty big school. I think we had like 800 in a class, and he was not in my graduating class. And I remember seeing him and thinking, I'm supposed to know that kid, but that was about it. And then fast forward, I went to college. He went to college. We did not go to the same school. And I was overseas for a summer in Haiti. It was my first experience overseas. And when I returned home, my parents announced that we were going to a new church, which was extremely shocking because we had only ever been at one church my entire life that I ever remembered. And so when I went to that church with my family the next time, I went into the college and career, and there was that kid, that same kid from my high school. And I recognized him, like, what's your name? And he told me his name was Brian. And we were friends in that group. I never thought anything about any romance or anything. So we were friends for 3 years. He ended up going to Haiti later, and then we even wrote letters to one another about Haiti without any clue that we were each other's like beloved. We had no idea. And it wasn't until I had graduated from college. So Brian was 2 years behind me in school. I had graduated from college and I was raising money to go to Indonesia. And I was actually waiting on a visa, and my visa kept getting delayed. It was during the summer. So he had taken a job during the summer milking cows, and he had gotten angry at a cow and he had grabbed her leg, and the cow had kicked him and broke his arm. And because of that, he wasn't allowed to go to work. So he was kind of bored. And so we saw each other, I think at church or something, and he had nothing to do, and I was just waiting around, waiting for this visa. Every week we would find out if I got the visa or not, and I didn't get it, so I'd be there again. And I remember him saying, "Well, can I help you pack?" And I just remember like thinking that was the strangest thing. Like, what do you want to do? Fold my underwear? Like, that's so bizarre. But it ended up that I was kind of dating this man, this guy from my college who lived in that town. We had never actually defined the relationship, but we were all going two-stepping. That was like a popular dance thing that you could do back then. And we were going with a friend of mine and her, and she had a buddy to go to dance with, and then I was going to go with this guy. And then my friend's friend came to town and we needed a third guy. And so I asked Brian if he would go. He misinterpreted that, that I wanted to go with him, but I had Jeff. So we spent that evening, and I remember he kind of hung around a long time. And it wasn't until after that he had, so there was this group of us that were in that church group, that college and career, like kind of Sunday school class, really. We would get together outside of church and just have coffee. And so I had just done that with this other guy, Matt, and it was completely platonic. And I thought, this is really a cool group. We can just get together and it doesn't have to mean anything. And then Brian asked me if I would go out to coffee with him. And I was like, oh, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And again, not thinking anything. And I'm not sure where in the timeline this is. It must be after we had that dance, the two-stepping thing, because then when it came time to go, I had met Matt at the coffee shop, and so that was my plan. And Brian had called me and said, "No, I'll come pick you up." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 I'll just meet you there." And he was like, "No, I insist." I'm like, "No, it's okay." So we went back and forth a little bit. He ends up picking me up. And when he did pick me up, he said, instead of going for coffee, I thought maybe I would take you to the art festival that's in town. And I was like, "Oh, okay, let's go to an art festival." So we walked around and had such a delightful time. And it was the first time that I remember he was walking in front of me, in one of those booths. And I remember thinking for the first time, who is Brian Shaw? Hmm. I had never had an interest in him, but then I was noticing the things that he was drawn to at this art festival. It was the same thing I was drawn to, and I was like, hmm. And then he asked me out for the next weekend, and then like really within a week, we knew that we wanted to be married. It was super fast knowing. But then I did get my visa and I did go to Indonesia, and I had made a 2-year commitment. And so parting was very hard. We really had fallen in love with one another. And I think we had about 5 weeks of dating is what I remember. And I went to the other side of the world. And that was right as email was dawning. It was the dial up, that psh, that sound. And in Indonesia, it was not reliable. And so he and I wrote letters, and it would take 3 weeks for a letter to travel back and forth. But ours was a romance of pen and ink letter writing, and every now and then that email would hook up. But I remember it took 24 hours. It was a 24-hour gap for when the server would go online to pull down any messages. So, and sometimes it didn't work. So I think because we had that, we knew that we wanted to get married ahead of time. And then we knew that we had that long separation. I think that allowed us to advance in our courtship. And then the cool part is, I mean, kind of cool. When I was in or my senior year at Wheaton College, I was so sad that I had no one. I wanted to be married so badly. And I remember crying out and praying and asking God if I was ever going to get married, because it felt like, and it wasn't actually true, but it felt like everyone else was engaged and I wasn't. I wasn't even dating someone.
Mm.
And we I heard God tell me that I would be 24 when I got married. And, I was graduating, and I think I was young. I was like 20 when I graduated from college. And I thought, 24? Oh, what was me? It's so long. But it ended up that I said goodbye to Brian when I turned. So I left in August after my birthday, and I was 23, and I wasn't coming back for 2 years. But I got malaria. I got malaria twice. And because I couldn't get over it, they gave me the quinine, they gave me the treatment, but I could not get well. And I stayed there for 5 months, sicker than a dog. I lost 30 pounds. I was teaching school and I could barely do it. They eventually sent me back to the United States. And then after I got back, I started having migraines. I was having like 3 migraines a day. I was living in a dark room the whole time. And I just remarkably came out of it, and all of it resolved. And my parents were taking me to all these different doctors. Nobody knew. Nobody ever gave me a diagnosis, and it just magically, maybe I was lovesick. That's what it was. I was lovesick. After all these years, I've diagnosed myself. Um, but in April, so I came back in February, and in April, Brian asked me to marry him with a engagement ring and all. And I say that because he sent me a string ring that he had made. Yeah, I got it in the mail in Indonesia, and I was like, "Is this my engagement ring?" And he was like, "No, I was just making a ring, you know." So, and we were married that October. So, and guess what? I had turned 24 2 months before. So,
Prayers were answered. I mean, so how long ago was that when you start looking at years wise? Because I
hmm.
know life accelerated itself after that.
Yeah, it does. You mean like what year was that?
Well, how long ago was that that you and Brian got married?
We married in 1996, so 28 years ago. It'll be 29 this year.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
So your first, after you were married, you felt fulfilled. You felt your dreams were coming, your prayers were answered. Let's go to family.
Hmm.
Tell me what happened.
Well, we had a dream to be missionaries, and we wanted to be. That was he had wanted to be a missionary, and he had gone to Honduras, and he had gone to Zaire, well then Zaire, and I had been to Indonesia, and so we really wanted to go to Africa, and we knocked on those doors, and we tried, and for 7 years we were not able to go overseas, and I can't really explain what all happened. It just every time we would try it wouldn't work. We ended up having our first baby 3 years into our marriage. So she was born in the year 2000, makes it super easy to know how old she is. um, and that was a wonderful, healthy pregnancy. Delivery was a bear, but um, and really, life was great, and I was working until that point. And actually, we had taken a job in New Mexico, believe it or not. We moved across the country because we wanted to be missionaries so bad, and the door wasn't opening. And we found this kind of domestic way that we could serve. And so we were house parents for delinquent high school boys, and it did not go well. It was very, very, very difficult. And we didn't have any experience with the kinds of things that these boys did. Um, so after a brief 6 months, and then having our daughter out in New Mexico, we moved back home to Ohio, and my husband took a job. He had a great job before. He decided he really wanted to milk cows, and so he went back to a dairy farm, and we were scraping pennies together so that he could work there. And I became pregnant again. It was my life dream to have twins, and I was pregnant with twins. And about halfway through that pregnancy, 22 weeks, I found out that one twin wasn't living. And that was just utterly devastating. If I go back to my childhood, that was one dream that I had. I fully believed that I had a twin somewhere. And I used to ask my mom where she was. And my mom was like, "Amy, there's no twin. Stop asking me." And I said, "Well, then I'm going to have twins." And she was like, "Okay, go right ahead." And so it was just such a dream to and it was just such a great thing to find out that I was having twins. I remember that just so vividly. And and so the devastation was just so tremendous that that baby was gone. Um I finished the pregnancy, and my daughter was born on their due date, and she was healthy. She was tiny and healthy, and she's 23 years old now, just an amazing human being. But the grief afterward was really tough because no one really gave it the validity. I mean, people knew, but I remember being angry with Brian that he wouldn't be sad with me. But I remember him saying, but Amy, you're still pregnant, And then we had the baby, and we still have a baby. And that was really everyone's kind of perspective. Like, well, you shouldn't be sad because you got a baby. Like, but I lost a baby, and I lost this dream of twins, and I never got pregnant with twins ever again. And that is still one of those things that I'm hanging on to. I mean, I'm old now, and I don't want to have more babies, but I still really would love to have twins. Maybe my children will have twins at some point so I can love on them and send them home. But so it was with two little girls, we ended up having the doors open to go overseas. You looked like you had a question, something you wanted to.
Yeah,
It's,
it is really traumatic. My mother gave birth to twins,
mm,
and sadly, neither of them survived my two brothers. And to this day, she ended up having, five children and then my two brothers as well.
mm,
And to this day, she still can't talk about it. They were still her baby.
yeah,
She carried them
yeah,
for 9 months.
yeah,
She birthed them.
yeah,
She held them. And
mm,
so I feel your pain.
mm,
I can't feel your pain. I can feel the pain from my mother
yeah,
that I can only understand. And like you said, still your baby.
yeah, yeah.
Before,
And we,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say we named him, um, and that was, I remember being pregnant, knowing, and every ultrasound then I would see that little baby's body shrink, 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 and it was just so, so sad. And I would drive around, and I had this Gabby toddler in the back, who she was born talking, and just driving around looking for a cemetery. Where can I bury what is left? And I just thinking that I needed to do that. When I delivered Annalie, there was nothing left. And I was so shocked. There wasn't even the second placenta left. And I felt so robbed. And I remember thinking if I had something to bury, I would be better. It would make it better. But that's a flash forward, that doesn't make it better. That doesn't make it better. Um, anyway, so the doors open. We do end up going overseas and we get to go to East Asia and we live there for 2 years and we have this unbelievable, just stellar time there. And I did get pregnant there and we lost that baby there and I almost died in country and I had to have a surgery and Brian wasn't able to be there and I had eaten breakfast, so they told me, "Well, you have to have the surgery without any anesthesia." I was like, "What?" And I was traveling without my passport. It was a national holiday, and I couldn't get back to get my passport to get out. The missionary leadership wanted me to leave to go to a better, not a first world hospital, and wanted me to leave the country to get the surgery that I needed, but I couldn't. I couldn't get my passport. I couldn't get to it for like probably 24 hours. And so the doctors in that hospital said, "You will die. We have to do this today." And then I remember, and Brian was in this other city with our little girls. And I was like, well, okay. And I remember them saying, um, "What are you so afraid of?" I'm like, "I'm afraid you don't wash your instruments." And they said, "Oh, we wash them every night." I was like, "Yeah, that's what I mean." But he showed me that they were taking out some clean tools, and they told me, take your clothes off and climb up on the table. And wide awake, I had this DNC surgery, and 3 feet away from me, without a curtain, there's someone having an abortion next to me, and it was very, very traumatic. And I remember just grieving that baby and then the piling up of the previous loss and just feeling like this is just so heavy. But I learned some good lessons in that. And one of the things that I take away from that lesson was that had someone told me in advance that I was going to have to endure what I endured, I would have worried and worried and worried. And how am I going to do this? And I would have really been all upset. But in the moment, I really felt like God's spirit carried me through that. It wasn't fun and it wasn't pleasant, but I made it and I wasn't, I mean it was probably more humiliating because people were coming in off the street to see what was going on with a foreigner and they didn't have any like door, like it was okay. You could come in and here I am up in these stirrups, and I mean it was just really embarrassing. I think I was focused more on those kinds of things than the actual pain, but that piece, that lesson has helped me multiple times in the future, realizing that I don't want to waste any energy in the moment worrying about something in the future because I don't know how God's going to show up. Because he's faithful and he shows up and in ways that I can't possibly. If I'm going to worry about something, I'm not going to worry right. I'm not going to worry it the way it's going to happen. So
Right.
that lesson was really important for me.
Got to go back to
Okay.
your resilience as a
Mm,
young girl,
mm,
the teasing that you had, the feeling you didn't fit in, and then
mm,
you meet your life partner
mm,
who fulfills not what you needed, but the life that you wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
Dynamic.
Yeah.
You then go through two losses, this suffering where you were back on your own. It wasn't even like he could be there holding your hand.
Mm. Yeah.
And maybe that's just as well, because I think about it. If my girlfriend, my wife was going through that, I'm not sure I'd let someone do it. Like, are you going to do
Mm.
this without, we fight for what we think is right.
Yeah.
Your resilience, your strength, unbelievable. So before we go on, and you've gone through this incredible experience, which really is, I can't even explain it. There are no words or thoughts to explain what you've gone through so far. But go ahead and tell the listeners the names of your children.
Joshua, Jency, Timothy, Annalie, Hope, Oliver, Oscar, Esty, Zeb, Dara, Kate, Toby, Gable, Windsor, and Summerlin.
That's 14.
It's a lot.
Okay. This is where the story gets so emotional and yet dynamic because here you are wanting twins, having had an adopted sister, and then you committed your life to giving life to children, whether you birthed them or
Mm.
whether you didn't. How did you come to be that mother, that lady that recognized the beauty? And I met two of your children this morning,
Yes.
two beautiful, Summerlin and Windsor,
Hmm.
both beautiful Asian young ladies.
Yes.
How did this evolve? How did Brian, um, was this his goal, his dream? How did you come together? Because 14 children, unbelievable.
Okay, well, there's one more important piece that I haven't shared. And so both of us wanted to be overseas missionaries. And after we had our time in East Asia, we came back, and the intention was that we were going to go career to India. And we had fallen in love with India as we were in East Asia. And every time I became pregnant, it was work. And I actually was told that I was pregnant at an infertility specialist in Thailand. And that was kind of a fun thing for that guy, I bet. Um, but I got surprise pregnant one time. And it was just 5 months after my son was born. And I couldn't figure out why I didn't have the ability to nurse him anymore. And it turned out because I was pregnant. And it was such a fun, fun, fun thing because that had never been the way it was. And I carried him to term, and we had chosen our city. We were narrowing down. The plan was we were going to go with an infant. We were going to go with our two girls and our son, and then whatever gender this final baby was. And well, one day there was no movement, and I called my friend who was an OBGYN. She told me what I should do, and there was still no movement. And so she said, Amy, go to the hospital. And it was right around Christmas. And as we were driving in to the hospital, I saw in a vision there was a banner across the road and it said, Sleep in heavenly peace. And I knew. And it was another ultrasound room. And they shut the ultrasound machine off and shook their head. And we're so sorry. I'm like, what? What do you mean you're so sorry? What? Turn that back on. Look again. And they did. And I was like, there. I hear the heartbeat. I'm like, that's your heartbeat, Amy. And it was true. Our baby, who was full term, had died right before birth. And so I had an induction and I gave birth to this beautiful baby boy. He was perfect and 7 pounds, 21 inches long, and they were able to figure out what happened. There was an amniotic band that had broken off. It happens in 1 in 10,000 pregnancies, and it had wound around. He had an extra long cord for some reason, and it wound around the top of his cord up by the placenta. So in all the normal checks, everything was fine, and it just cinched off at the very end. And so we left the hospital with an empty baby carrier. And it was, if the other deaths were devastating, this was the coup de grace. This was absolutely shattering. And the mission agency was like, you cannot go to India right now. We cannot send you there. It's way too difficult there. You cannot go there. Um, and so it felt kind of like banishment. We were sent to a very remote area of Ohio, and we ended up living there and making a life there for I could not become pregnant for another 2 years, and I finally did. And I had our daughter. It was a very frightful pregnancy for me. I was so afraid that it was going to happen again. It did not. And I was also very convinced that she was a set of twins, and she was not. But we had, after 9 years, we finally had 4 children. And I knew when I was going through that final pregnancy that I couldn't do it again. And we had this dream for a large family. And it was really Brian's initiation of saying, Amy, would you consider international adoption? And he had been learning about the sub-Saharan crisis of these children from the AIDS, pandemic or epidemic, I guess. Um, and would I consider that? And I was like, yeah. And it was really after we adopted our son from Uganda that God gave me a vision. I was driving to the orthodontist, and it sounds like I get a lot of visions when I'm driving, but maybe only a couple. But I saw this whole like thing just played out and I never had seen our family that way. I think when you're busy living your life, you don't really see it from kind of an eagle eye view, but that's what I was given. And this concept that we were a family that had lost children, and it marked us. We were always sad for those children. In fact, my son Oscar would be a senior graduating this month, and I have grieved a lot over that. I miss him. I miss the life that I didn't get to have with him. But we were a family that was that had lost children, and we realized that there were children in the world that had lost their families, and we could be a family for them. And so that's how, that was even after we had already started. But when I got that revelation of what was really going on, we had this dream to be missionaries. And then I got this revelation of what was actually happening. People were saying to us all the time, "Oh, you wanted to go to the nations, but God has brought the nations to you." But I just resisted that. I was like, "Yeah, but I want to go." But I think now in hindsight, I can say that really was the dream that God had for us. I think sometimes we don't get it right. I mean, we get close. And so after we brought our son Zareb home, I knew that we had more. And I stumbled onto this blog that was showing this picture of our son. And I don't know, he just looked familiar, just like, oh my goodness. And I sent that to Brian, and one of the really cool things was that he had my same birthday. And so my son Toby and I share a birthday. He's about to turn 15. So it's crazy. He's taller than me now. We brought him home when he was 2. And so it just began this very intense bringing home of children with medical needs. And in the beginning, I think we thought, well, we'll bring home Zeb, and then we'll still go to the mission field. But after we started, I remember with Toby, he had this condition that we didn't really understand, and I couldn't even say it back then. I remember we had this conversation that if God's not going to open the door for us to be able to go overseas, we might as well use these years to be a family for kids who need it. So let's go ahead and bring them in, bring them in, bring them in. And we kept doing that. And so we brought home 5 additional children from China, all with pretty significant needs. And so that's where we got to our, wow, now we were done. And we brought the last 2 home in 2016. And then our story shifts.
Before we get there, because it is a dynamic shift coming up, I want people to understand what you and Brian gifted. When you said you adopted children with significant needs, so many times people look at the exterior or the ease of supposed perfection, but you went the other way. You looked at children that you could help, that needed real love and care and understanding. Can you share some of those, the extra challenges that came with the beautiful children you adopted?
Sure. Yeah. I think I remember one of the things that we did, I'm going to go back a little bit. One of the things that Brian didn't like about the process in Africa was that there were a lot of, it kind of felt a little trendy for white families to adopt a black baby from Africa. And he didn't like that. Well, and I agreed, but we actually went to our agency and said, "Hey, what happens if we get out of line?" Well, basically that child would go to the next person in line. And that really rubbed Brian the wrong way. Like, okay, we're not doing that. So we actually adopted our son without any agency, which you can't do that anymore. So that same mindset then was transferred to China. And, there were a lot in the initial wave of China adoptions. There were a lot of healthy baby girls, and that had to do with some, policies that were in place in China that we don't need to go into. But um, we were, I fell in love with this boy who we named Toby, and he had arthrogryposis. And like, what is that? And we have this concept. Let's bring him in. Let's bring him home. If we're not going to go for the next 15 years, let's be his family. And so we weren't sure he was going to walk. But he did. He did learn to walk. In fact, he walked before we got there. But his arms and his hands are contracted. He's missing some muscles. But he's an amazing human. I mean, yeah. I mean, you asked me about some of the challenges. So the thing was with Toby, I would never have known about Toby if somebody hadn't advocated for him. So I was like, I have to advocate for all these other orphans. So I started doing that. And one of these children that I advocated for was this girl who was sitting in a wheelchair in a Chinese orphanage, and she'd been sitting there for a long time. She was turning 9, now she was turning 10, and we were praying for her family. And I don't know if you're guessing it, but we were her family. And so we ended up bringing her home when she was 10 years old. And there's an amazing story about her almost dying as we get there. And I mean, it's just an amazing story. But
Will you share
she
that
couldn't
story?
she couldn't walk. Yes. So she was born with spina bifida, and depending on where it happens in your back, you may be completely paralyzed from the waist down. She's moderately paralyzed, but she couldn't walk. She also could not use the toilet, and they had never helped her with catheterizing or anything. So her whole life long, her bladder essentially was full, and that caused a just repeated bladder and kidney infections. And when we met her, they handed us a bottle of children's Tylenol. And we had adopted from China before, and they didn't give us Tylenol. And I was like, well, what is this for? And they're like, well, in case she has a fever. And I was like, okay. I should have thought that something is up. So that was on a Monday. And by Thursday, she had really quit talking to us and quit interacting, and she was just kind of a shell of herself. And on Friday morning, all the adoptive families take their children to an international clinic to be cleared for their visas. And when we went to that appointment, they were like, your child is extremely ill. And so they got us into an international clinic, and they diagnosed her with this terrible kidney disease. And she had gone septic, and she was hours from dying. And so that infection had gone into her blood and was being carried all over her body, and she was shutting down. And so we got her these IV antibiotics, and she came back. And so when we brought her home to America, we got her into a special clinic for spina bifida. And I remember they used a catheter on her on the table, and they told me, Amy, you're going to need to learn how to do this. So, and I about hit the floor because that was not my expectation that I was going to do that. But the look on our daughter's face when her bladder was emptied for the first time in her life, she was like, oh, she had never felt that release. And it was pretty profound. So, we ended up getting her some leg braces and canes, and she learned to walk. She's 21 now. She's doing an amazing work, amazing stuff. And so, yeah, she ended up using the wheelchair only for long distances. And she never brought it into the house. She would always walk around the house with her canes. And then, when in the morning and late at night, she would take those braces off and she would crawl on the floor. Because that, she couldn't stand up. But yeah, so that's, some of those conditions. But we brought home a daughter with schizencephaly. So the understanding is that she probably had a stroke in utero, and so she had a cleft in her brain where she couldn't speak, and most likely she will probably suffer from seizures as an adult. Um, and we just specifically after we brought home Esty, the 10-year-old, we realized, okay, let's go for kids that really, some of the needs are a little bit less or more minor, and then some of these kids are like they really need adopted. I mean, they all need adopted, but they would be less easy to find other families. And so those were kind of the children that we went for. And specifically about Windsor, I remember when I found her, I I couldn't stop thinking about her, and I would ask Brian, and we were always done. We were always finished. We declared we were finished many times over. But Brian agreed to pray about her for 2 weeks. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and I wouldn't wake him up, and I would just be crying and crying. And I would hear that song about God, you're a good father. And it was just praying that, okay, just love on her over there and protect her. I mean, I just know that orphanages are some really awful places for vulnerable children. And so I remember Brian came home from work one day and he was shaving after work, and because he worked at a dairy farm and he didn't shave in the morning. So he was shaving after work, and he called me in and he said, "Hey, I've been praying about this little girl for 2 weeks. And I'll be honest, I don't really get a sense one way or another." And I was just like, oh. And then he said, "But I always want to err on the side of giving. So let's bring her home." And I was like, "What? Really?" I mean, it was just the most exciting thing. And then I continued to do the advocacy work for, finding these children. And I found this little girl. There was a little video of her, and she reminded me of Toby, and she sparkled. And I was like, this little girl is going to be amazing. I can't even tell the story without getting goosebumps all over again. And so I was advocating for her. You guys, this is just like Toby. You're going to love her. You're going to love her. And trying to find a family for her. And eventually all the families pulled out. And I said, "Brian, what if we brought her home? What if we brought her home?" And he was like, "Okay." And so I remember it was a Saturday and I had to get a hold of the agency, because in China you had to use an agency. Get a hold of them and say, "We want to adopt her. Can we add her to our adoption of who we now have as Windsor?" And they said, "Oh, we just put a policy in place that you can't do that, because they're in two different areas in China, and we won't allow that, because people had basically, that was too long to be in country." And so anyway, long story short, it was Brian who went to bat for her, and he wrote this amazing, heart-wrenching letter about how we needed to have her in our family. And they got back to us and they said, if every family wanted the children the way you do, there wouldn't be an orphan crisis. And so they said yes, and we got to bring her home. And I can't tell you how many times I am with Summerlin and I think, we almost didn't get you. And she is just, you met her. She's an amazing human being. But, part of her, so she has arthrogryposis as well. And she has it much more severely than Toby. So she cannot dress herself. She cannot feed herself. She cannot toilet or bathe herself. So, it's ongoing care. But I'll tell you what, I mean, yes, you have to, she's always wanting to do things. Like, she wanted to water my plants the other day, but the deal is I got to go fill the water every time. And she figures out how she can do it, and her elbows don't bend, and her hands don't have grip, and her knees don't bend, and just different things. But yeah, she's amazing. I could talk all day about my kids.
I can tell. And I will say, like I said, they came on camera before we hit record. And the one thing that stood out, first off, you'd never know that they have these supposed disabilities
Right, right.
because they got such beautiful smiles. You can tell they're loved
Mm,
and they have love. And that's a credit to
yeah.
you and Brian.
Mm,
How is it with you've got your own biological children and then
hmm
you've got these adopted children? You go back again, the struggles sometimes when you have adopted and biological. And then how is your family? How is the relationship between the children? Do they all share your love and acceptance?
Absolutely. Yeah. They do. And I think, a lot of times they advise, like, make sure that your adopted child is the youngest in the family, but we didn't do that. I mean, sometimes we did, but actually in the very beginning, we brought Zeb home, and he's about maybe 9 months older than Derek Kate. So they just finished their sophomore year in high school. Now they're going to be juniors. And then, we brought home Toby. He was younger. And then we brought home Esty. And Esty was 10 years old. And so she was older than our third biological child. And so we already, threw that rule out. But I think because they were, really like this age wise, that they were, um, I don't know if people are just listening, but I'm putting my fingers together, just kind of woven together that we just had this gaggle of children and they were just all the Shaw kids. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's four that look like Brian and me, and then there's the others that don't. And we just were this colorful family of multi races.
It's beautiful.
Hmm.
So you wrote an incredible book that you were compelled to write. It wasn't something that was done for any other reason apart from you had to. And the name of the book is Navigating Goodbye. Please tell us the story.
Well, we brought home our last two amazing children in 2016, that fall. And then 2017, the big event was moving. We moved to a bigger house and just such a delightful place. And then 2018, every year it was like something amazing was happening because we brought each kid home like in a new year, and it was like, whew, wonder what's happening for this year. And it would be another child. And and then we moved, and then wow, what's 2018 going to bring? And it was a terrible shock, actually. It was completely out of the blue, and blindsided is a really accurate description. Brian came home from work and took a nap, and I got the kids on the preschool bus and went to check on him, and he couldn't make a sentence that made any sense. And he was writhing in pain from a headache. And it was just so not him to do that. And that was also the first day he had ever taken as a sick day in our whole marriage. It was, I didn't know what to think when he came back home early in the morning. But yeah, so, after some time of him not being able to talk and struggling so hard, he felt like he had something so important to tell me. And at one point, he stood up. He was in the bed, and then he stood up and he put his hands on my shoulders and he said, "Annalie, listen to me." And I was like, "Brian, what? Why are you what?" And so I called 911, and they came. They did an assessment, and he was overly fascinated by their medical equipment, which he was medically minded, and so that shouldn't have been. And they took him in, and very quickly at the ER, the doctor pulled me aside and said, "Your husband has a mass in his brain." And I'm like, "What? What?" I just I couldn't guess what was going on. I thought maybe the pressure of all the life we had Dan, we had a milking cow. And so he was getting up early and milking this cow, and there was a lot of stress. In fact, he referred to her as the stress cow because it was very stressful to have this one cow at our house, in the barn. But we had a lot going on. There was a lot of movement with all the kids, and we had 6 kids on IEPs, and we had all these medical appointments and surgeries and therapies. It was a nonstop job to do that. So, and, he was the breadwinner. He would go to work every day. And I just thought he was having a meltdown, honestly. But to hear that he had like he had a mass in his brain, and then he went into, an emergency brain surgery a few days later, and he ended up, the diagnosis came back that he had the worst possible brain cancer, the most aggressive brain cancer that you can have. And they told us if you do nothing, he'll maybe have 3 to 4 months. And if you choose to do treatment, which by the way, the DNA of his tumor is such that it's resistant to the treatment that we have, um, he may have 6 to 12 months, but it's 100% fatal. And we're just like, wait, what? It was just so out of left field. He was healthy. He was so much fun. He was always getting up early, and well, he'd milk the cow and he'd exercise, and then he'd have time with the Lord and his Bible and breakfast, and then he'd go off to work. And so it just, he never had any symptoms at all except that day that it all came down. So the book is called Navigating Goodbye because it was us going through the process of navigating the goodbye to my husband, my beloved husband, and their beloved father.
It's so hard to even ask questions because this isn't an experience, this is life. This is your soul partner that was so unique because what you've lived, adopting the challenges that you took on because of love, not because of I want a challenge, but recognizing the
Mm.
pain or the need in others. And to find a soul partner that had that same
Yeah.
desire is almost it is out of this world, right? It's
Mm.
a gift. It was something like
Yeah.
you said, you suddenly woke up to this is the man all those years back before, you were
Mhm.
heading off on your own
Mhm.
supposedly. And now you've been told you've got 3 to 4 months left without treatment, obviously. Where did you start? How did you feel personally? Like, because you're such a doer, you're such a get up, you're so resilient and you take on challenges. How did you process that?
I mean, like everyone, probably just utter shock, lots of tears, lots of just like, wait, I thought the trajectory of our life was this, and it was awful. I mean, it was just like a nightmare. I remember waking up and thinking, okay, this has to be a bad nightmare, and it was not a nightmare. I mean, I could see it because he had the he had the staples in his head from the surgery. But I do remember it, a couple weeks went by and then we had to go back and get those staples out. And that doctor was the one who said, okay, you may have 12 months. And it was walking out of that office that we were holding hands. And I remember walking down the hallway and going out the door. And by the time we were out to the car, I was like, okay, you know what? We are going to have the best year of our lives. That's it. I mean, that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. We have to have the very most fun. We have to embrace life. And he absolutely did treatment, and it was chemotherapy and radiation. It was 6 weeks of radiation, and we chose to go to the Cleveland Clinic. And so that was away from our family. And so I would stay with the kids and he would be there. And Brian couldn't, the radiation was only a matter of minutes a day. And so we had a sign up sheet of Brian sitters because he couldn't be left alone. And so different people would sign up for a week. Like my dad did a week. His brother did a week. I think maybe my brother did. We had some people from church go out and spend that time. And I was there with him the first week, and then I was there in the final week. So I guess there weren't probably that many people, but we had different people volunteer to drive us back and forth. People brought us meals, and and then we would bring him home on the weekends because a lot of the girls, it was in the spring, and they had a lot of those daddy daughter dances at the school, and so he did those with our different children when they were younger, in the elementary ages. And so, yeah, it was just this resolve of like, we're going to make this really good. And I remember Brian asking, or no, did I ask him? Yeah, I asked him, Brian, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? I mean, like, what's your bucket list kind of thing? And he was like, Amy, I'm going to get everything. I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to have everything. What do you want? I was like, I want to go to Paris. So that fall we went for 10 days and it was like a second honeymoon. It was absolutely amazing. He didn't have any issues at all. I'm sure he was on that like adjuvant chemotherapy that you have to take after the initial 6 weeks. But it didn't bother him. And we went to lots and lots and lots of art museums, and we went to just it was dreamy. It was absolutely heaven. It was a really amazing time. And then yeah, we actually, so that was September of 2018, and Brian was all done with chemotherapy by December. And then it's just kind of a waiting game. And, we were already like, wow, this is it. So Brian was diagnosed in March. So the 12 months would have been March of 2019. So January, we have an MRI, and they would do an MRI on him every 3 months, and just to see, is it growing? Is it back yet? Kind of thing. And it wasn't. And so we went through the entire year of 2019 with no medication. He was on nothing. and he felt great. And I remember him telling me, I wouldn't know I had cancer if people didn't tell me. And I'll tell you, because glioblastoma is a very, very serious brain cancer. And so the the powers that be decided, yes, you get disability like immediately. And so he was home with us and it was delightful. We had the best time. And so that 2019 was just precious. And then, we go into 2020 and then March comes and the world shuts down. And it was during 2019 that we met our son Joshua. And he was not like legally adopted. He was 20 when we kind of intercepted him. And yeah, so he joined our family and he moved across the country to live with us. And his story is its own wonderful thing. And he ends up meeting his future wife. Actually, today's their anniversary. Isn't that fun?
Congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations to that.
Yeah. Um, and so we are all at home when the shutdown happens, and I am cooking up a storm. I am going to the grocery store with 2 carts of groceries and just cooking and cooking and cooking. But I'll tell you what, those were the sweetest times. And we would have a family devotion in the morning time, and everybody would bring their Bible, and Brian would lead, and then we've rotated the leadership, and even little Summerlin back then, she would lead something, and it was very simple, but it was so precious. And we would linger, the little kids would kind of filter away, and the older ones, we would sit there and talk for 45 minutes, even longer sometimes. Those were sweet, sweet times. And, we just made good on that time that we had.
I have to
So,
say, your positivity, your approach to life, approach to time,
mm,
right? And making the most of it, because it's very easy to wallow into the victim, poor me, why me, and get caught in that place. Even though we want to be positive, we've experienced so many people that lose the time we're gifted because of
yeah.
the approach.
Hmm.
And before we carry on with the story, how dynamic! I got constant tears in my eyes as far as I can feel
Oh.
this side, because it's so beautiful. But the navigating goodbye at this point, what have you learned as your lesson to the point we're at in Brian's life right now?
Mm,
As in, 2020 and having the most amazing. What lesson would you share right now with someone that's in this position but
mm,
doesn't know how to? Just one quick thing that became an awareness to you looking back.
mm. That's an awesome question. You have to savor the moment. You have to savor the person you're with, and you have to, like I said, what I about the story of having that DNC in that East Asian hospital. You can't waste your precious now worrying about what's coming, and that's so easy to do. But it also, especially when you're caring for someone who's terminally ill, um, their their symptoms shift and change. And Brian's did. There were times where he was not with it, and it was hard. But yeah, I think, and it was during 2019 that God told me to write a book, and I didn't see, the title of it or anything like that, but I knew that it was going to be about navigating that space between getting a diagnosis and death, because that is such a hard window of time. It feels like you have a dragon on you, and it's not on you, it's just out of reach behind you, and you spin around and you can't really see it, but you can feel its hot breath on your neck, and you know that it's coming for you. It was very much like that. And so, let not my dear listeners who are listening to this think that we were not emotional. We cried every single day. At some point there was tears where we were like, Brian and I would just fall into like an embrace of sobbing. And there were, he was a journaler, I'm a journaler, our older daughters were journalers, and I'm sure that all of us were writing about how hard it was. But we couldn't let that overtake the reality that we had right now. And so I think that's what I would say is savor what you have. Really take a good look at what you have because you don't know what you're going to have in the next moment. And that's true for all of us, right? All of us, we
Yeah.
need to do that.
Did Brian ever talk about what he'd miss ahead? Like things that he wish he could be here for?
I think he certainly thought about it. We never talked about our future grandchildren. I think we were so busy raising kids that were so needy that we never thought about like, oh my goodness, can you imagine when we have grandchildren? We never really talked about that. But we did have hopes that we would raise our children to go impact the world, and we hoped that they would go live all over the world so that when we were old enough that and they were all out of our house that we would go visit them all, that we would just get to travel and visit them all. That's really what we wanted to do. And so, and he really, really wanted to go to India. And he never did. And I never understood that. But well, I will save that for later. I believe that it's all going to come back around. But, so yeah, I think certainly, seeing his children get married and, seeing them graduate from high school. We were so shocked that he was still there when our daughter Annalie graduated from high school in 2020. And it was during COVID. So she graduated in a parking lot. Um, and he was there for that. But when my son Oliver graduated, he wasn't there. And that was, the beginning of those big, things. I guess he wasn't there was he there for Estee's graduation? I'm trying to remember. I don't think he was. So it was just, those heavy things began to happen after he was gone. But yeah, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so we're back in 2020. You've gone these couple of years. You're not on any drugs. It's like, Brian says, if people didn't tell me I had cancer, I wouldn't know.
Hmm.
And then there was another shift.
There was another shift. And, even in that time, he was like, I wonder if I should go back to work. I was like, no, please don't go back to work. I was so addicted to having time with him. It was so great. Yeah. So, in one of those routine MRIs, it was May of 2020, and they said, we think we see something here. It was super, super tiny, like 3 millimeters, just so tiny. And so, okay, we're going to check you in June. And so we went back, and in June, there was no change. So we're like, yes, great. And then in July, it doubled. And so they said, okay, well, we have a clinical trial for you. And so I can see us in there at the Cleveland Clinic signing those papers and just the fear signing our names on this paper. Logically, as much as I understood, this trial made so much sense, so much promise. We asked all the questions and he began the trial. And so he was supposed to do it from July until October, and then he would have a follow. He would, at the final, at the end of that period, he would have another MRI to see, did it shrink? Was it gone? And we didn't get that far. And there was a day, I believe it was early September, that he just was off. And he said, I feel like it just have an allergy. And I was like, okay, those are not allergy symptoms. It was really weird. I didn't even think to call the nurse, but the Cleveland Clinic like happened to call. The nurse called and said, "How is Brian today?" And I said, "Well, he's kind of like this." And they said, "We're getting him in tomorrow for an MRI." And I was like, "Oh, really?" He had put himself to bed, which was odd. And so we went in and they're like, "Yeah, this has absolutely like exploded in his brain." And I was just so like, but the trial made so much sense. That was supposed to do the opposite of it. It wasn't supposed to get rid of the tumor. It was just supposed to hold it, like keep it there because it had doubled to 6 and was just going to keep it there. But it had just gone kapoo. And so they said we have to do another surgery. And so September 30th, I believe he had another craniotomy. And so the reason Brian had trouble speaking in the initial thing was that his tumor was over his speech center. And when the swelling happened, that's what gave him the trouble speaking. And so that tumor had exploded and had grown more and more through that area of his brain. And so they did this 4-hour MRI where they had to map out exactly where the tumor is. And then they had to put these things on him to hold him in place. He had to wear them overnight. They look like Cheerios stickers. And so all of our friends put like cereal on their foreheads and sent us pictures. It was so fun. Um, but he went in for that surgery, and there was a high chance that he was going to have to be awake for his brain surgery. And I was scared to death of that. Like, oh my gosh. Um, and so what they do is, and after the mapping, they said, yes, we do have to have him awake, because if what they do is they put him to sleep, they open him up, then they wake him back up. And fortunately, the brain doesn't have any pain sensors. So basically, the surgeon would operate, and Brian had to be nonstop talking. And if he started to slur his speech, they would back off on what they were operating on. And I do want to say this. Brian remembers this surgery, and I asked him later, like, what was it like? He was like, well, there was this guy in a tunnel, and he was sitting on the floor, and he was looking up through the tunnel so that I couldn't look around. I'm sure they had him like I know they had him like in a halo, so he couldn't move. And so he had me say my ABCs, and then he had me say the ABCs backwards. And honestly, I got bored, so I told him all about Jesus. I was like, you did? During brain surgery? He's like, yeah, I figured I had a captive audience. So, so they got 100% of the tumor. It was an amazing, amazing thing. They got it all. And, they closed him up, and we go home, and they want to do radiation. And so it was actually our anniversary, and we got a call. We were away for our anniversary, and we got a call from the oncologist, and he said, well, we thought we'd have the pathology back, but I want you to know that it looks like there's a second type of cancer in that cavity. I'm like, what does that mean? Well, it either Brian has another kind of cancer and it's metastasized to the brain and gone to that same place, which is highly unlikely, or we're just really not sure. And so that was really hard to hear. That was really, really tough. Actually, I have not thought about this, Dan, but we went to, oh, I'm not going to be able to remember the Mackinac Island, which is up in Michigan. We went to Mackinac Island, and never in my life have I been more worried. I'm not a worrier by nature. I'm really kind of a buoyant personality. But that trip, it was during COVID, and Brian had previously had a bunch of pneumothorax. So he had the tops of his lungs removed, like the top third of both lungs removed. And I was very afraid of him getting COVID and like dying of COVID when we were busy fighting brain cancer. Like I wanted him to get as much of life as he could. And I didn't want that dumb COVID to take him out. So I was really nervous. And we were on this boat, and people weren't masked. And I was so freaked out. And I had never spent a period of time where I was so worried. And I remember in my own like self, just like, what in the world, Lord? And God basically said, this is what you would be like if you worried. So don't do it. And that was like, okay, I'm done. It was a horrible experience. And then, we got that call the next day about there's another cancer. And so I was like, nope, not going to worry about it. It turned out that he had a type of cancer, a type of glioblastoma that was, oh, if I could remember the name of it, I won't, it's not coming to me, but it was a type of cancer that teenagers get. And it usually takes their lives in a matter of weeks. So we knew that it was super serious now. And so that was October. And then November was a pretty decent time. Brian was having some weird sensations. I don't know how detailed you wanted to get into it, but um, as somebody who's interested in brain stuff, as I know you are, he had the weirdest kind of seizure, and we didn't even know it was a seizure, but he would try to think, he would be thinking like, what is that song? And he would ask us that, what is that song? And it's like, and he couldn't ever describe it. And we were like, well, you got to give us a little more than that. And he was like, oh, it's just right there. What is that song? And then he would think that, and then he would smell smell, and then the right side of his body would feel like somebody laid a warm blanket on it. And that, like, three things would happen to him repeatedly. And it always started with him trying to, what is that song? So interesting how the brain works. But we found out later that those were seizures, and that was the beginning of it. And then at the end of December, he had a grand mal seizure that unfortunately all of the kids were there for, and it was very, very traumatic. It went on for like 8 minutes, and I had him in my arms on the floor in the kitchen, and he kind of like went limp, and he was turning gray, and I thought he had died in my arms, honestly. And immediately the thought that went in my head is, it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Um, but he didn't die. Yeah, we continued living life. And so that was the end of 2020. And it was the beginning, it was the first couple of days of January. And that was when I made that Facebook Live post that has been seen by thousands of people. And I wish I had known that because I would have brushed my hair or something. And I sat in the corner of our bedroom and I said, okay, I haven't been able to tell people what's going on, but here's what's going on. And basically, we're not okay, but we are okay. And we were having so much fun, and then we're not. And this is the hardest thing. So just don't ask me, how am I? Because I don't know how I am. I know that I'm not good, but I am good. And I told them, we have this holy privilege to walk Daddy down the red carpet to the door of eternity, and he's ready to go. It's happening. And so it was that Facebook Live that I said that, and people shared that like crazy, and it just resonated with them. And that's really where the name of, what I ended up naming my business, Walk the Red, is walking the red carpet. And so over the next 3.5 months, that's how much time we had left with Brian. He had a lot of seizures, but I'll tell you what, we took an epic trip together as a family, and all of us drove down through Atlanta, and we had this amazing pit stop. These people raised money and they did all this stuff, and they had fireworks for us, and it was amazing. They brought in a chef, and he came and he made a steak dinner for us, and they had popcorn machines and cotton candy machines, and they brought in some art stuff so that I could do some art. And it was really amazing. They actually tried to get a hot air balloon to come, but the wind wasn't right. They were going to do that too. And then we went down to Orlando, and someone who owned this huge house that had like theme rooms and everything gave us, I don't even know how many nights we had there, completely for free. I think that place rented for 4,000 a night. And then some other people raised money, and they bought all of the food for us, and they had us just go pick it up, and it filled this 12 passenger van with food. We had so much food, and we wanted for nothing. And it was amazing. And we went, we're like, hey, let's go to Disney. We had all this money that people had donated, like, go and have fun, go make memories. We swam with dolphins. We just did this amazing thing. And then some other people on the Gulf shores of Alabama, they had donated their house to us. So we drove from Orlando to there, and we had this amazing time there. And then we drove up through Birmingham and through Nashville. And it was in Nashville that we rented those big trucks. Gosh, monster truck. We rented a monster truck, and we went through Nashville on a monster truck. And one of our sons just loved monster trucks. That's all he could think about. And so Brian made sure that that happened. And it was just this amazing trip. And he had seizures while we were on the trip. And we always had to have this medication in our pockets and give it to him right away. And I'll tell you what, that day that we left that really big house, he conveniently had a seizure when I had to pack up everything by myself. He would have a seizure and take that medicine, and he'd be like out for 12 hours. And the next day I'm like, you had a seizure and I had to do it all. I'm on to you. um, Not really, but
And would
so
you
we
do
just
it again? Yeah.
we did a lot of things, and it was in that period of time that we were sitting in our bedroom with a couple of our kids, and we were crying as we did. And he said with great emotion, I'll do anything you guys want. I'll do anything you need, whatever you guys need to make this easier. And that's when Jency, my oldest, said, Dad, she had already been thinking about it, but she didn't know how to bring it up. She said, Dad, will you walk us girls down the aisle? You're not going to be here for any of our weddings. And he was like, yes, I'll do that. And I don't think any of us really knew what was going to happen, but my mom was there and she brought us her wedding gown and we got my wedding gown that was preserved and we got it down out of the attic and we opened it up and I put it back on. And I've got a little video of Brian seeing me in the wedding gown again. And Jency wore my wedding gown and Annalie wore my mom's wedding gown. And then the younger girls, there was a nonprofit called Beauty Comes from the Heart and they donated white dresses for the girls. And then there was a flower shop that made the flowers, and somebody else made a wedding cake, and the church decorated for a wedding, and the church provided a photographer and a videographer. And so he walked each of our six daughters down the aisle, and then he prayed for each one of their future marriages, and it was just as bittersweet as you can imagine. And yet we had the power to get through the day. But it was just beautiful. It was beautiful. And my oldest daughter's getting married this summer, and so she'll have that video of Brian walking her down the aisle to play. Like I said, we packed a lot in there. We did more stuff, even after that. And then he had just some crazy things happen. Like he was moving and he was never going to lay in bed and be sick. Far be it from him to be sick to play that role. So he was moving some bales of hay and he was up in the loft of the barn and he took a step back and there was nothing there and he fell. He like cartwheeled down and landed on his head. Believe it or not, he landed on his head and had a concussion. And I remember taking him into the ER and they were checking to see if he was bleeding on the brain and he wasn't. And they really wanted to keep him overnight and monitor him. And he was like, Amy, I don't want to stay in the hospital. Please don't make me stay in the hospital. And I'm like, okay, I won't. And they said, do you understand? If you take him home, he very well could die during the night. And I said, I understand. I understand. He didn't. He didn't die. He didn't. He had more time. There was more time yet for him, and so the time came in April, and he was in some really severe pain, and that was really the impetus to get into hospice was because he just couldn't live through another day. I knew the night was coming, and he was like, "What else can you give me?" And I was like, "There's nothing else." It was crazy because this is the guy that like hit his thumb and on accident. Actually, he didn't hit it with a hammer. Something else happened and he broke his thumb in 5 places. It like shattered and he was not going to go to the ER. He's like, I'm fine. I'm fine. Like, no, you're not. So he was really tough. And so for him to be begging me for pain medication, I knew it was really serious. Um, and so, yeah, just very quickly we got into hospice, and then once he was on morphine, he was like a lot better. And I'm like, well, let's go out for a date. And so we went out for dinner, and we went out for ice cream, and that was the last time we ever did anything like that. After he was on morphine, I start planning another trip to the ocean. I'm like, oh, we can do it one more time. But we weren't able to. So I don't know how much more you want to hear about that, but he did. He made it. He made it all the way into the doors of heaven. And I had been praying that God would let me see in. I just wanted to peek into heaven when they came for Brian, and I didn't get my wish. But you know what I did get to do? Is I got to see the look on my beloved's face when he got his first look into heaven. Right before he died, he went, oh, and then he died. And I was like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And I threw my arms up and I said, he made it. He made it. And so, when you love someone, you want the best for them. And he was getting everything he ever had faith for. He was a little boy when he believed in Jesus, and he really just never veered from that. And every good thing he has now. Anytime I hear something about heaven, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And I just love that. I just love that. When you love someone, you want the best for them. And what's really cool is before he passed, when he was still walking around and stuff, he came to me. We were in the bedroom and he put his hands on I think it was on my face. He held my face in his hands and he said, Amy, you and the kids, you're just going to soar. You're going to soar. But just like when a rocket blasts off, it's hot and there's fire. But once you get up out of the atmosphere, you're just going to soar. And I believed him. And I think, that's really what we did for each other. I got him excited about what he was getting. He helped me get excited about what I was getting. He used to pray for me, Dan. He used to pray with me for my second husband. It was just crazy. Like I've flipped the script a little bit and thought about what would it be like if I were dying. Could I have done that? Could I have prayed for a second wife for Brian? I don't know. I want to be your everything. But
Right.
that's what he did. And
That's
I don't
love.
know. It's real, true love. Yeah.
When he took his last breath and you saw that look, he opened you
Hmm.
to see through him. How did you feel? Because you're so positive and you threw your arms in the air and said, yes, he made it.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's really hard for me to fathom because I don't have your experience, your relationship, all that time together.
Mm.
What did you say to your children? How did it then go from that to finally Brian's transcended?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy for the kids, and they all took it different ways. We had a son that went really, really off the rails. It hasn't been easy, um, but I think that because we were always open with the kids from the very get-go about his diagnosis, and that we didn't know how it was going to go, but this is what doctors were saying, and um, we had such a history of God always doing miracles in our life, things that like where we felt like there was no answer, there was nothing. How are we ever going to make it? And then God would do something that was completely out of the blue. Brian brought this huge rock into our house from the field. I mean, it was very, very heavy. And he had me write all over it with a Sharpie, like just different like key words to remind us of God's faithfulness and like remind us of these miracles. And so we had that physical rock to say, look, I don't know how we're going to make it. I don't know. I have no idea. And if I think about it, I could be really scared, but I have a history of God rescuing us over and over and over, and he promises he'll never not rescue us. So am I going to believe him or not? That's really what it was. And um I don't think we muster faith. I feel like we are given faith, and I have been given a gift of faith to be able to believe those things. And Dan, I feel very strongly, and this is something that I've written in my book, is that we are we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, and that we're going to continue. We continue after our bodies expire. Our bodies are just currency to buy up the opportunities in the world. And I want to go as long as I can, so I eat healthy and I work out and I try to sleep as long as I can. It's kind of hard,
Yeah.
um but I recognize that, and the thing is that anytime I feel sad, I'm like, but I get what Brian has. That is coming. That is guaranteed. And all those babies that I've been sad about, they're there too. And my dad has since passed and he's there, and obviously lots of people we love. It's all coming, and it's better than we ever know. It's going to be so good. And so I just have this incredible urgency to use whatever time I have left. I'm 52 years old. I don't know how many more years I get. Brian only got 47. I don't know how many more days I get. I want every day to count. I want to encourage other people. You can have more in your life. You can have an abundant, joy filled life, even when you have pain, even then. And that's the message that I want people to know. And that's what keeps me getting up every day and, keep working at trying to build this business so that I can get this message out. There's more to life. It's just more than what we all think. And it's exciting. It really gets me going.
You're an absolute angel. I mean,
I don't
unbelievable.
know about that.
No, you are. To live the life you've lived, to take on the challenges that were most people wouldn't even consider, and yet you embrace them. To understand your story. It's not even a story, it's your life. It feels so disrespectful almost saying, I've said the story a couple of times,
Mm.
but it's really life events. I wish I could go back and edit and say, tell me. the next event. Tell me the next part of your life
Mm.
because
It is a story, though. It's a story, and I'm not writing it. This is not how I would have written it, by the way.
it's incredible. I also think back to your children, when they found out, and children don't have a perception of time. I remember looking back into my
Mm.
life. We have no perception of time. So
Yeah.
when Brian's going through this bad time, he's only got 3 months, he may have a year, and time goes on. We never think the end is coming, right? Because
Mhm.
all we've
That's right.
experienced is what's going on.
Oh, that's so true.
Where are you
Mm.
now? Because you said it's 5 years since Brian passed,
4
four
years.
years since Brian passed,
Yeah.
and anniversary
Hmm.
coming up. How do you handle day to day? Because now you've got all these beautiful children. You're
Hmm.
still the matriarch. I believe the patriarch is still there because it's in
Hmm.
their soul. It's part of
Hmm.
how they were shown how to live with love. What are you doing now? How are you going day to day? And what is your dream now?
It's a good question. Every day, I mean, I'm getting up at 5 every day, and I'm not blowing smoke. I really believe that every day matters, and every day I'm trying to read for personal growth so that I'm getting better. And I can't give to other people what I don't have. So I have to keep getting better. And I do. I would love to light the world on fire, that they would see that there's more and there's joy, and that all the petty fighting and all that kind of stuff would just cease, because we have a God who loves us. I mean, he like absolutely loves us, and he's got great things planned for us. And I think, one of the lessons that I've learned is that so often people, and one of my children made this mistake, and if I can say that, where we take our circumstances and we say, oh, this must be true about God because this happened in my life. So often people say, well, how could there be a good God when there's pain in the world? But I mean, really, that's not really what's going on. I mean, there's just like God has made a way for us to know Him, and yeah, there's this evil in the world, but if you can push through and get to that actual relationship with God, it is like this blooming of self. And you become this version of yourself that you never dreamed possible. I mean, if my little self, who was so afraid of other people, even noticing me, that they would say mean things to me, if they could see me now, if I could see myself in the future, I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have believed that I could feel this joyful. I mean, that's really how I feel. I mean, even in the hardship, I mean, I miss Brian. I really would love a second husband. I would love somebody to come in here on a white horse and help me, at least fix all the things around the house that are broken. Um, but even in those times, I have this relationship with God that sustains me, and that brings this beauty that comes from Him, but it comes from within and it blooms outward. Um, and I think that's what's such it just is so exciting, that there's always more. And after, in my desperation, after Brian was gone, and I realized the magnitude of what I had left in, that was falling around in shambles around me, I remember crying out to God, my snotty nose in the carpet, if you don't give me more of you, I will die. Because I'd lived enough life, I'd seen enough stuff that I didn't want to turn to alcohol or, you know, any of the other vices, because I knew better. I knew that God was the answer and that I needed more of him. And so I pleaded for more. And after he did some things in me, and I was like, oh, you're like that? Oh, you're so much better than I ever knew. What? All this time, and back in those early days, I mean, it was like flannel graph Jesus, I mean, how excited does anybody get about a flannel Jesus on a flannel board? I mean, it's not very exciting, but that's not who he is. It's absolutely amazing. And it's enough that I say now, Dan, that I wouldn't undo this if I had to give up what I have with God now. I wouldn't go back to that life of having Brian here, as awesome as it was. My time with God is that much better, that much more treasured. So it's only getting better from here. It's only getting better from here, because I'm going to continue to share my story. I'm going to continue to impact people. And then I go and be with him. And then I don't know, there's all this more stuff and I can't wait. The Bible talks about this age and it talks about ages to come. And that is so exciting. There are ages to come, like different sections. And I don't even know. My mind can't even possibly fathom, but I'm so excited. I'm so, so excited.
Incredible. It's so many feelings that I have now. Listen, first off, I'll confess it's the first time I've ever cried in a podcast,
Oh,
but not because of the sadness,
mm,
because of the joy and love. I can
mm,
imagine
yeah.
you both there. It makes me think, and anybody
Mm,
watching this, listening to this, hug your loved ones.
yes.
So much
Yeah.
more. You're such an
Yeah.
example of facing
Hmm.
life and love with
Mm,
true care and devotion.
yeah.
It's so revealing. And when Brian says his dream, his children to impact the world,
Hmm.
I have no
Hmm.
doubt. I have
Hmm.
no doubt. Your attitude would determine your altitude. And when he said it's going to be
Hmm.
hot, you're going to fly. Look at
Hmm.
the altitude you're going to.
Hmm.
Flying isn't a location.
Hmm. Yeah.
Flying is a being. It's who you are. So I
Hmm.
know you speak as a keynote
Hmm.
around people. It's so inspiring. It's really dynamic what you give. And then again with your book, Navigating Goodbye,
Hmm.
we can never prepare, and yet
Hmm.
we can always have a plan. But
Yeah.
the plan we
Yeah.
have has to be so heartfelt because there
Hmm.
is no systematic process.
Yeah.
It's incredible. If you could leave the world with one message, what would that message be?
Don't miss the love of God. Don't miss it. It's worth everything. I would trade everything for it. That would be my message.
Beautiful. There was a video that you sent me of Brian. With your
Yes.
permission, I'd love to put this in
Oh,
the notes, of the podcast so people can go and click and see this amazing man that you shared life with. And I went and watched it. It was what a fun guy.
it's
What
so
a
much fun.
what a crazy, wacky guy. When you look at when you're playing, what's the game where you're popping up through the table and hitting with the
Yeah. Well, he made it was a version of whack-a-mole, but it was
yeah.
Whack-a-Shaw because our last name is Shaw. And so yeah, he had us all up under there and with
And
pool
seeing
noodle.
the kids it's so funny, and then his creativity, and then him on the phone saying, or recording himself saying, I don't know where I am, but Amy, come find me.
Yeah,
All
right.
these crazy things. And he just laughed. He just played,
Yeah.
and I know it's a 9 minute, just over a 9 minute video.
Yeah.
What really resonated with me was the last shot that you put on, and you used the music, or he was dancing to the music, Staying Alive.
Oh wow, I never even thought of that.
How
Oh
ironic
my
and
gosh.
yet dynamic that the
Wow.
last piece of that video is the music Staying Alive. And that
Wow.
I really believe is what he's done. Seeing
Wow.
you meeting your two beautiful daughters earlier before we started
Mm,
recording on camera, seeing the energy that you have, you wouldn't be where you are today without him, and he
no.
wouldn't be where he is today
Mm.
without you.
We needed each other. It was really good. Oh, thank you for saying that. And even just talking about that video brings tears to my eyes because it's just he's so important to me. And there's videos that I forgot to add to it. I could have made it so much longer. He just was so fun. He was so creative. And, he's got Summerlin in a milk crate and he's hoisting her up in a tree.
I saw that nowadays, it hit me. Nowadays, parents would be told that's dangerous for the child. We've got to bring in child protective services. And I'm like, but that's how we lived. And if they had a fallen out the crate, you survive, you get up, you brush, and let's do it again. It was real family growing up
Yeah.
and seeing
Yeah.
all your children and the fun and the play and the love they had. So thank you so much for sharing your life.
Thank you for honoring Brian. Thank you. That
Absolutely
means so
incredible.
much to me.
I
Mm,
urge people, get your book,
mm,
Navigate Goodbye. If you want to get Amy to come and speak at your events, it will be so dynamic because it's real life. And if it brings anything, it's appreciate the now, commit to the fun,
mhm,
commit to your journey, live
mhm.
your passion in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. today.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to meeting you again in the future.
Me too. I wish I could hug you through the screen.
It's already happened. You already have. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.